So after 60, you can't see.
You gotta put them on. Yeah.
So
The opinions expressed on the radio program by the hosts, co-hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions and responsibility of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Gynesis Radio, www.gynesisradio.com, Gynesis Radio's owners, management, or affiliates.
Good evening. Welcome to GenesisRadio.com. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Kendall Stevenson, and I'm the host of the Empowerment Show. As always, we like to open up our show with a moment of gratitude. So let's see, what can I be grateful for today? Waking up. Do you know how many things have to go right in order for you just to wake up? My Lord. So those are the things that I have to be grateful for. Now, today I have a returning guest. His name is Matt Delp. That's correct. He, I guess, would be a substance abuse expert. He would know more about it, at least more than I do. So I'd like you to introduce yourself again, please.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Matt Delp, and not only am I in recovery myself, but I've been working in drug and alcohol treatment for really about the last 9 years. Currently, I'm at Brookdale treatment centers here in the Poconos in Scott Run. I've been there about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I worked a number of years in Berks County in an all men's long-term aftercare program where we had the opportunity to work with people for, anywhere between 6 and sometimes up to 24 months.
Yeah.
So you really got to see people get better. And I'm a product of that. I was a long-term aftercare guy, trouble with the law and going to treatment multiple times. And so I believe in it, and been able to have a front row seat and, talk about gratitude, but being able to day in and day out, being able to participate in that with people. Not only do I believe in it, but I enjoy it.
Very good. So here it is. You've been around this situation for a very long time, dealing with a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life. So let me ask you, how can you physically tell that someone is addicted to a substance?
The hallmark of addiction is loss of control. And you see it in the loss of control of the use, right? And usually the first thing that's going to stand out is, despite negative consequences that are showing up in somebody's life in terms of their behavior, they continue to use, right? Or drink, right? So they can drink and use drugs despite negative consequences. And that's the first thing that's going to kind of get somebody's attention. Intervention's a word that gets thrown around a lot. And I believe in intervention, but there's so many, a lot of times we say the word intervention, and what we picture in our mind is like the room full of people sitting in a circle. But most of us, especially if you've suffered from this disease, we've had many, many forms of interventions, whether it's a conversation from a loved one, a DUI, things with court. And despite those moments, right? And that's why I think it said, we're not bad guys trying to get good, we're sick guys trying to get better. Right. And so
that was your mantra.
That was it, right? And despite all that, we continue to use. And that, for a lot of sometimes, because you're a withdrawal, then you must be an addict, or you must be an alcoholic. And not that withdrawal is not part of that process. It absolutely is. But you give anybody alcohol long enough, they'll become physically addicted to it, right? And so there's that loss of control piece is really what you look for, at least what I look for in terms of conversation when you're assessing, right, what somebody's dealing with.
Now, some people they're known as functioning addicts.
Mhm.
But it's very difficult to spot anything with them. They work for years and years, and you never can tell.
Right. And so that's where that loss of control piece becomes so important, because even myself personally, I mean, there was a long period of time, right? But there was a period of time in my life where I drank excessively, but I still got everything done. And so you could have made the argument at a period of time in my life that I was a quote unquote functioning alcoholic. And so the progressive nature of the disease of addiction is exactly that.
Mhm.
And so just because it might have looked like something out here does not mean that it might not turn into something more corrosive further down the line. And that whole idea of the functioning alcoholic a lot of times is language that can be used by the addicted individual to help keep them sick. You know, that maybe this isn't as bad as what everybody else see. I'm still functioning. Well, the idea of functioning could be on some level subjective, right? And so what does my family believe that I'm functioning? Does my employer believe that I'm functioning properly? And
Some people are really good at hiding it, though.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, heroin addicts. Not so much the ones that shoot up, but the ones that sniff the heroin. I think a lot of them are really, really good at hiding it.
Well, and with the opioid use disorder individual, I mean, at some level back here in the early stages of that, I mean, my own personal experience was the same with this too. I was bigger, faster, stronger, and when I would take an opiate, whether it was a pill or snorting a bag of heroin, and I could, it's a depressant, but it would
turn you into Superman.
I would be up, right? And I could talk longer and I could laugh and I was having a good time. But again, the progressive nature of that, see, for the addicted individual, nostalgia is sometimes our worst enemy, because I want to hang on, I want to compartmentalize everything. And I want to hang on to this period of time in 2002 between April and November where I was still using and had it all together. And so I keep going back to that. It's almost like when somebody's the victim of an abusive relationship, right? And and we're only ever focused on the good times, and where the denial around that doesn't allow us to look at the truth. And at the end of the day, that's the value in denial. I don't have to look at the truth.
We were talking about while we were off air, we were talking about the heroin addicts, and I told you down in Brooklyn, around Fulton Street in the Crown Heights area, these guys used to be leaning down. What'd you call them? What was it?
The dope fiend lean.
The dope fiend lean. So that was, I guess, heroin is still kind of up and running, right? Here's
what's scary, right? You got a whole younger generation of individuals that don't know that heroin's brown.
Really?
Because a lot of what's out there right now is fentanyl.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. And 10 years ago it was starting to show up. Now it's everywhere. And now we've actually even moved to the place that these addicted individuals fentanyl is what they're after. Where 5 years ago it was pretty much fentanyl, right? But everybody was a lot of people were still calling it heroin. It wasn't heroin. It's fentanyl. Now we've come to a place that people they're out there looking for fentanyl.
Is this, I noticed that they use fentanyl for more than just narcotics. In the medical field, it's used pretty often.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been used for pain management for a long time. I mean, you have the fentanyl lollipops that you would used to get from the hospital, or the fentanyl patch. And when you think about a fentanyl patch, they're like 3-day time release patches that people use for long-term chronic pain that are anywhere between 25, 50, or up to 100 micrograms. I mean, that's how potent or ultimately toxic that chemical is, and that's why the overdose rates over the last number of years have really gone up in terms of drug addiction. I mean, 2022, I believe, I didn't read anything for 2023, but there was 160 7,000 people in the country that died of drug overdoses, and 85% of those were opioid use disorder. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, fentanyl is what people are finding in, they're getting pills, right? They're buying pills either off the internet or buying them off the street, and they're being pressed by individuals that don't work for the pharmaceutical company,
Right.
and they're fentanyl. And I can remember there's plenty of times I've gotten people into a treatment setting, and we do an initial drug test with them, and what have you been using? I've been using oxycodone. Well, the only thing that's in your drug screen is fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people don't even know what they're getting.
Is one worse than the other?
Oh yeah, fentanyl is 1,000 times or something more potent than morphine, which is really what heroin is. And so if you look at what like a lethal dose of heroin would be, maybe something like this, but what a lethal dose of fentanyl looks like is a couple grains of salt.
Jesus.
It's that much more potent, and which is when you're mixing something like that, how do you don't know. Many years ago, the idea that somebody would die of a drug overdose from snorting a bag of heroin, you never had that conversation. What? And somebody snorts a bag of heroin and they OD because it's not heroin that's in there anymore. It's something that's 1,000 times as powerful of morphine.
On my way here, there was a sign that was outside that I was reading, and it was like it says something like every hour 150 people are dying from fentanyl or something like that.
I don't know. So if you think of, you'd have to do the math, right? So if you took 107,000 people in 2022, and how many minutes, and you would break it all down, you could figure that out. My guess is, if you did the math in the hour that we'll be talking here together, 3 or 4 people will lose their lives.
Just while we're sitting here talking.
Yeah, to addiction. Alcohol still kills more people every year than all drugs combined. So, 107, 85% of that was opioids, right? But alcohol was about 108,000. And that number has gone up about 20,000 people each year since 2019 with COVID. And so that's brought that up from, the high 70s, high 80s to, I think in 2022, there was 108,000 people or so that died from alcohol-related deaths. So 215,000 people that year.
So what causes people to want to take drugs or take that amount of drugs? It can't be money.
It's not. Yeah, it's not money, and so it's being able to make the distinction between. Right, we were talking about this a little bit earlier too. So, the language that's out there right now when you're talking about, for a long, you're a drug addict, right? And that's what you would say. Substance use disorder is the terminology that's out there right now that's pretty acceptable across the industry, right? And so substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, I'm still a big fan. I still to this day say the disease of addiction. There's a difference between somebody that drinks alcohol and somebody that's an alcoholic, and it's all about the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Addiction is a brain disease, and there's an unbelievable amount of medical and clinical literature out there that support that. Science has come a long way in being able to kind of demonstrate for us what happens in the brain with the addicted individual. And so, you look at addiction, and addiction is something that affects about 10% of the population. And so, 10% of the population are going to have a different response in terms of what happens in their brain to somebody that's not an alcoholic. And once that process has begun to take place, that's something that the individual doesn't have any control over, because the parts of the brain that are affected by that are not the parts of the brain that think. They're the parts of the brain that have been designed to keep us alive for, as long as as we've been around. And so, that midbrain area, you talk about your limbic system and the amygdala and the hippocampus. And so it's about survival, reward, memory. And so that the nucleus accumbens and the ventral striatum and all those parts of the reward center, those parts of the brain do not think. And it's a very archaic system. And so it's the part of the brain that's allowed us to survive as a species for a very, very long time. And so anything on the planet that has a brain has that part of the brain. The part of the brain that thinks for us is the prefrontal cortex and all these different cortex regions, parts of the brain are the parts that mature over time, right? As we mature and become an adult. And those are the parts of the brain that are going to allow you to use logic, reason, executive functioning, the ability to evaluate risk. Your morals and your value structures will mature and develop up there. And so when, that reward survival part of the brain says go, right? That prefrontal cortex part of the brain is the part of the brain that can be like, whoa, what are you doing here? But if you have an overstimulation, if you have a maladapted response, an overstimulation coming out of that reward center of the brain, that will flood the brain with dopamine and other chemicals that your ability to truly evaluate risk is, I can't say that it's not there, but it's impaired to the point at some level that it's virtually non-existent. And that's why you see the behavior of the addicted individual sometimes look so deplorable in terms of their inability to they pathologically pursue reward through chemical use.
Yeah, the brain is too busy having fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not even about fun. It's about survival, because that's the part of the brain, right? The part of your brain that's, food, reproduction, right? Your ability to the emotional response that's connected with memories down there. That's the part of the brain that is negatively impacted by the disease process of addiction. And so you at some point, on some level, that's why the powerlessness of it looks the way that it does. Because if I'm thirsty, like, there's not a whole lot of thought. And that's what, Matt, why would you pick up a drink again?
Man, go ahead, take a drink.
I'm gonna have a little water here, right?
So listen, alcoholism.
Mhm.
I understand alcoholism is hereditary. So is all addiction hereditary?
So, no, at least in what I've read, right? Genetic predisposition does not guarantee that because you're an alcoholic and you're an alcoholic and you have a kid, they're going to be an alcoholic. The genetic predisposition that you see in a family system is like, it creates vulnerability. And so, if your father has blue eyes and your mother has blue eyes, and you could say that there's a genetic predisposition or a vulnerability that higher probability that you're going to have blue eyes, right? And addiction will work the same way a little bit. If you have a long history or even a short history of addiction, but that genetic predisposition it's there. There's other factors that play into it. We've come along in a lot of what I've read. I mean, trauma rewires the brain the same as, negatively impacts some of those same parts of the brain that addiction does. And so you look at adverse childhood experience and trauma that individuals have experienced, as kids between the ages of 0 and 17.
Right.
Other
those are factors that play in.
Yeah, the age at which somebody
necessarily
starts to use.
There,
right, the age that somebody starts to use. This part of the brain doesn't mature. For a female, it's about 20 to 21. But for a male, it's around 25 years old. And so if this hasn't matured yet and you've found yourself in a position where you're using addictive chemicals, right? Well, there's a higher probability that you would manifest addiction too. And then if you couple that on top of maybe a genetic predisposition, and then you've also grown up in an environment where, drinking to excess is somewhat normalized or acceptable, you have a lot of things maybe working against you. And so by 25 years old, you're experiencing your loss of control with alcohol.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that St. Patrick's Day is coming up, and people always talk about the Irish,
right?
And how they always drink. I think that's a big stereotype. I mean, I know a couple of Irish guys, and they're not into the alcohol like that.
Yep.
But it seems that a lot of people try to live up to these different stereotypes, especially like the drinking or even the marijuana.
Marijuana.
You go down into certain neighborhoods, you got kids 12 years old smoking a joint.
And it's, marijuana is the new hot topic right now, right? With all the medical marijuana stuff. And look, this is stuff that comes up in conversation with me a lot, especially working with families in terms of their loved one, is because, the word safe always wants to get associated with something, right? And so there's no safe way for an alcoholic to drink alcohol, right? That's the whole, once you're a pickle, you're never going to be a cucumber again, right?
Okay.
Time only works one way. And so with marijuana right now is if you have the disease of addiction, substance use disorder, there's probably not going to be a safe way for you to use medical marijuana either, because what marijuana does to the brain is will keep that process in motion. And especially with a younger, you said about the 12-year-olds, and this is really even with the psychoactive chemical, right, THC, that what you're after in cannabis has the ability to help kind of if there's a predisposition for schizophrenia in your family, especially for the male population, I believe it's like the ages between 18 and 25, right? That can help push that over the line. And so, there's a lot more, not a lot more, I think schizophrenia, maybe 1 in 1,000, right? But individuals that, because of their cannabis use at a very young age, they've really kind of shown and manifested all these signs of schizophrenia, and that usually shows up with an individual in their early 20s. And the levels of psychosis that you're seeing, especially in younger people with excessive cannabis use, or psychosis, psychosis was something you always associated with like methamphetamine or maybe even crack cocaine. But now you're seeing it with cannabis, and that's because of the potency of what's out there right now. To compare cannabis today to what it was in the 70s is a joke. When you're looking at THC concentrations in the 70s, that was like 1 to 5%. And now out here, even flower cannabis right now is getting close, 35% THC consistency, maybe even closer to 40. And we have all these different oils and dabs and shag glass, or the amber, all the different stuff and you can have 85 to 95% THC consistency in some of this. I mean, it's
85%?
85 to 95%.
85%.
Very concentrated.
That's like going down south and getting some moonshine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's the difference between White Lightning and a Coors Light, right?
Yeah.
But it gets talked about like, well, when I submit now, we're in a much different place. I mean, you go to college now to learn how to hone in on the cannabis plant to figure out how to get it as potent as you possibly can.
Oh, there's money in it now.
Well, exactly.
I mean, in the 70s, it was all right. It was just,
Right.
It wasn't like cocaine where they were making big money on it.
Right.
I mean, marijuana has never been a big money making thing. Now unless you're selling big kilos of it.
Right.
But the average guy in the street, he's not making any money on it.
Right. And so alcohol is a wonderful thing to compare with that process because, and I heard somebody else say this. I listened to him speak one time. It made a lot of sense to me. But what he said was he believes that if alcohol would be discovered today, right, alcohol would be a Schedule I controlled substance, right?
Yeah. I'm wondering why it's not. Honestly, I'm wondering why they haven't. I mean, but I say the same thing about cigarettes. They know that these drugs kill. They know that the alcohol kills, but they don't seem to want to put more restrictions on it.
Well, it's very ingrained in the culture, so it's like you're never getting the genie back in the bottle.
Right, back in the bottle. You're
right
about that.
I know, but here we are, and so cannabis is right there, and we're having a lot. I mean, I have individuals come into treatment now for cannabis use disorder, marijuana use disorder.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes that out of control. right? The loss of control is there, and their ability to maintain a bank account, maintain relationships, and maintain employment ceases. And their soul, what begins to motivate them is the pursuit of the perceived reward of what cannabis will provide for them once they've used it.
Well, they got different types of cannabis that make you do different things. What do they call it? In the couch?
Yeah.
And, what's the other one?
Sativa. And,
yeah. So one is supposed to get you up, and the other one's supposed to
put you down.
I don't know. Going to ask you about those 4 C's.
4 C's. So,
because this is a part of the treatment, the 4 C's.
Yeah, and so craving and compulsion. Consequences are at the end. Craving, compulsion, control.
I'm sorry, I
didn't
want to take.
I needed
control.
to hear it. I needed to hear it. So craving, right? Craving and compulsion. And so when you think about, all right, when I'm working with somebody, right, and I spend a lot of time on educating about the brain and what happens and the way the brain is designed to make a decision, because that's really what becomes impaired. And so the first thing that we start talking about is your thinking. And so what is the thought, right? And the thought comes in, and what do I end up doing with the thought? And so when we really break it down is, the thought starts here, and if I, depending on what I do to the thought, I can become obsessed with that thought. And so that obsession part becomes very, very real. And then compulsion comes in after that. And then when you work through compulsion, that's where I come to that place of loss of control. And so, I spent a lot of time in AA too. And so, trying to understand what a craving really is. And so,
like a pregnant woman, I want some chocolate.
Chocolate, right. And so I've really, I've always looked at addiction as somebody's inability to reconcile their intentions with their behavior, right? Not the bad guy trying to be good and the sick guy trying to get better. And the other piece then to be able to look at is addiction is about escape and relief through instant gratification. And so the stress response system of the brain kind of sets things in motion. And if you have a relationship with a chemical that was always the thing that when you were happy, it helped you get you more up. If you were sad, it helped numb you out, right? If I needed to do this, in
the couch.
Yeah, in the couch. How many times I said that? I just need to have a couple of drinks and I'll figure this out, right? And so, what is it that I'm really craving? And so that's where I got to be able to pull it away from withdrawal, right? Because you get through the acute withdrawal part of that early recovery process. But that craving and that compulsion is about that escape and that relief. And the lie is that right now is forever. And so I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so unhappy. My life is so disorganized. My relationships, right? All the different things. If there's no way that I'm possibly would be able to survive feeling like this. And so what's the one thing that I have out there that's always been able to kind of remove that from me? Now, the lie is that the chemical takes that away from me. The truth is it might numb me out for a period of time that I don't have to think about it. But then here comes the loss of control. Because once, for most of us, especially if you suffered from addiction for a long time, the jury's not out on once I start, I can't stop, right? That's, you see it. But then the other part to addiction is now that I've stopped, how is it that I continue to be able to give myself permission to start to do the thing again? That is really the one thing that's out there that's the most destructive for me and myself and my relationships with other people.
That's the craving.
And the loss of control, right? And so then those consequences, right? And that becomes the piece of the process, like from the outside looking in, you're like, what are you doing? You're about to lose your house. Your second marriage is just dissolved, right? You lost custody of your kids. right? And the individual would be like, I know, but I know what. And see, it was, it's always everybody else's fault, right? Or if you could understand me, then you could understand. And the addicted individual, and this is where the denial of this is where people get so angry, right? Listening or trying to work with somebody, because it's like, why can't you see it? What is wrong with you? And so those 4 C's are always at play in the disease process, right? It's about the craving, it's about the compulsion. You're constantly moved and motivated towards something that's self-destructive. Your inability to see the consequences, to see the reality of your situation, and life falls apart. And that's why it becomes so isolating, because if every time I come around you, you're going to be challenging me on something, well, then I'm just going to go over here.
Would you consider addiction to be a mental illness?
Mm-hmm.
And why?
Because it's the brain disease of addiction, right? And so, sometimes I think you have to be careful when you start talking about, to just say, mental illness could just be that's a pretty broad lens, right? But it's a brain disease, right? It's a brain disorder. And, the American Society of Addiction Medicine has been around for quite some time, since, the early to mid 50s. But in 2011, they published, in August of 2011, they published a definition that I still use today when I'm doing educational stuff with individuals. But you really summarize it, and, addiction is defined as a genetically influenced disease of neurocircuitry of reward, memory, motivation, impulse control, and judgment. And then that's why you'll see the individual begin to pathologically pursue either chemicals or behaviors in the process of relief. And so when you start to unpack the brain and you see, reward, memory, motivation, impulse control, and judgment, again, those are going to be the parts of the brain that are down here that react, right? Except for your
frontal lobe,
right? And that's the part of the brain that's going to be able to tell me to slow down. It's like, here's the example I use with the patients a lot. So we're adults, right? We're driving in a car.
We are?
We qualify.
Okay.
We qualify. If we're driving in a car and we see the ball roll out in the street, right? What have we been quote unquote trained to do?
Stop.
Right, because
there may be a kid coming behind.
Might be a kid behind the ball.
Correct.
And so, our stress response system, perceived threat, right? Cortex, whoa, right? I'm slowing down the car because cognitively there may be perceived threat, and there also may be a child behind that, right? Doesn't mean that there is one, but it could be. Now, but the 3-year-old, for example, does the 3-year-old not look both ways because he's stupid? No. It's because his reward, he wants his ball, was bringing him joy. He was having fun with it, right? He wants what he wants. I want it now. And so he, boom, runs out into the street to get his ball.
No, he gets his drugs.
Exactly. Because what the 3-year-old doesn't have is a matured prefrontal cortex. And so his ability to use logic, to use reason, to use executive functioning and appropriately evaluate risk, it's not there. It's not because intellectually he's right. It's because his brain has not matured. And so when you see the way that addiction affects the brain of the addicted individual, even as an adult, it's a very similar process. And so that's why a lot of these forms of talk therapy have been so successful in treating addiction, mental health, right? Or even trauma survivors, because cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, can help somebody get out of that emotional reactive part of the brain and help get you up in here into those cognitive parts of the brain that really allow you to think something through.
Okay. I just want to make a station identification.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in. This is GenesisRadio.com. If anybody would like to give us a call, that would be 888-304-4401. Don't even know my damn telephone number. 888-304-4401. If anybody like to give us a call, you got a question for Matt, give us a call and let us know. Matt, we've talked about what's going on as far as being an addict and how one becomes an addict and what's the ramifications of being an addict. So let's talk about some treatment.
Sure.
What kind of treatment do you have? What I come in, I'm sick.
You're sick?
I don't know what's going on. My head is, as you say, my attention span is very short. I'm all over the place. What do you do for me?
First thing, it's about stabilizing somebody. And so, detoxification, it's been around forever. And there's a lot of different, but we're dealing with a lot of different chemicals sometimes. And it becomes, especially right now, alcohol and benzodiazepines.
What is it?
Benzodiazepines, so Xanax, right? Yeah, Ativan, different benzos that are out there.
I'm a little ignorant to those things. So what is the first one that you said?
Benzodiazepine.
What is that?
That's
for?
just the drug classification.
Okay.
So, you have alcohol, you'll have opiates, you'll have stimulants, benzodiazepines. And so a lot of benzodiazepines like Xanax, for example, Ativan, Klonopin, are medications that are a lot of times prescribed to help people with anxiety.
Okay.
However, they're addictive. And
when not used properly.
Right. Or if you have a predisposition to addiction, taking these chemicals could really set that in motion for you, and people will experience the loss of control with that. But like with alcohol and benzos, just abruptly stopping those is extremely dangerous, because you put yourself in a high risk for a seizure with alcohol and benzodiazepines specifically. And so, medically managing that detox becomes really, really important. With our opiate guys and gals, there's medications that we'll use to help somebody land, right? We hear about Subutex and Suboxone, and those are medications that you'll use for the addicted individual with opiates to kind of help taper them down, to help stabilize them.
Yeah, I heard you use the phrase when they land. So I guess they're high and they're
most people come into a detox either significant, still under the influence or very, very sick. And so, getting that initial assessment becomes extremely important, right? What have you been using? How long have you been using? What have you used today, right? What has the timeline really looked like, to try to get the best idea on how you start to treat somebody, because you don't want to over medicate, but we have a lot of life-saving medications out there right now, and we have all kinds of protocols of medications that have been around for quite some time. Which the American Society of Addiction Medicine is what kind of we defer to, at least with where I'm at now, and our medical team and our medical director. And so we have these standard protocols that are safe to help get somebody down to a place, and that for most people that's going to take 5 to 7 days.
Now with the heroin, what was the pen that they were giving out or something for people that were overdosing on heroin? There was
Narcan,
there you go.
Naloxone, right?
How does that work?
Well, there's the IM where you can inject somebody, but most Narcan that's out there, what people see is it's the nasal, right? And it's the 2 milligram shots.
So this brings them back when they're
really what it does is it throws you into withdrawal. It puts you in precipitated withdrawal. So you wake up and you're not real happy, and you'll feel pretty sick a lot of times in that moment. But the reality of it is it saved your life, because it goes in there, and what it does is it blows the receptors open in the brain that the chemical has, let's say, bind itself to, and it opens that up and it throws you into withdrawal. and it'll bring you back. And that's why a lot of people are angry or agitated or start swinging sometimes when they come out of that.
Really?
Yeah, or they'll vomit or become very ill. And that's why it's still important, even if if you've overdosed and you've been brought back with Narcan, you still need to go to the hospital.
So other than your own experiences, because I know I know that you had treatment and that you had help, but pretty much you helped yourself, right? Because my understanding, you get on drugs, I didn't put you there. You put yourself there. So to me, when you get off drugs with a little bit of support, you kind of did that. You got yourself back off.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, I had a lot of support, but yeah.
But support and what is it? Their main factors or something. One is support. I think education is another, and
Education's a big piece of it, right? So a lot of what is suggested in terms of a lifestyle change for somebody to make that's suffering from this disease, right? If you don't believe addiction's a disease, most of what's suggested for you to do is absolutely absurd. It seems very, very ridiculous. Now, if you come over to, I'm not going to call it the truth, right? Or the reality of the situation, that addiction is a brain disease. And it's going to take a period of time, 9 to 12 months, for the dysregulation that's happened in your brain to be able to come back to a place of homeostasis, right? For that to re-regulate itself. If it's going to take maybe around 12 months for that to happen, then a lot of what becomes suggested for somebody in that first year of recovery makes a lot of sense. And so when you look at other primary or chronic illnesses, right, which addiction is, so primary can erupt spontaneously with or without cause, and chronic, which means it's long-lasting, ongoing, right? It can be treated but not cured, and without management of daily symptoms, you could find yourself in a position where you're going to experience injury or premature death. So hypertension, we talked about, right? Diabetes, asthma, right? Are primary illnesses that people have that they may have done, quote unquote, nothing wrong. It's manifested, right? They have it. They need to treat it. In order for them to successfully keep that in remission, it will take a level of lifestyle change in order for that to be accomplished. Sometimes it's medication and lifestyle change. Matter of fact, in all three of those, a lot of times. And then addiction, right? Is there some medications that I might need to use early on or take? Do I need to take those long term? I don't know, but long term will tell the tale on that. But there's absolutely going to be a lifestyle change that's going to be associated with me, keeping that in remission. And when we're talking about addiction, I'd say maintaining recovery. And so a lot of what individuals struggle with is, one, believing that the amount of time that it's going to take for the brain to heal it's hard to accept that it's going to take that long, because it should be, all right, I'm not drinking, I'm not drugging right now, I'm good, I feel good. Well, this hasn't healed yet. That takes time, and it takes structure, and it takes support, because the craving, the compulsion, right? If my ability to evaluate risk maybe isn't back to 100%, right? When I'm having a very stressful or having that moment or a moment of weakness, whatever what somebody wants to call, what's maybe going to be my ability in that moment for me to be like, you know what, Matt, don't do that, right? It's not that I'm an idiot, but it's that part of the brain is not. We're not firing on all cylinders yet.
So this is what I hear. You got a guy, he's in the bar and had one too many, takes the keys, okay, I'm going to drive, because he thinks that he's in control, and not the substance that he's taking.
Right, I'm good. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Right, but they're impaired, right? Cognitively, you're not where you need to be. Your ability to use logic, to use reason, to appropriate evaluate risk, it's impaired. And here we are. And then the consequences that come out, the negative consequences at times that come out of that are what they are.
Mhm.
And then, what's wrong with you, right? What were you thinking? I don't know. Well, that's fair.
Recovery.
Recovery.
There's supposed to be like 4 major things that happens during recovery,
Mm-hmm.
which would be like, I don't know, health, home, purpose, community. All of these things seem to play an important role in a person's recovery.
Yeah. So health is the one that's, boom, that's the one that's right.
Mhm.
And look, a lot of times, right, we see denial around the consequences of, I've hurt members of my family, I've hurt the relationship with my kids, my relationship at work, right? You see that? But there's also the health complications that come with addiction, whether it's heart stuff, lung stuff, weight. Remember, alcohol turns right into sugar.
Yeah,
Right.
Forgot about that.
And there's with the skin and with abscesses, with injection sites. There's so much different health stuff that can come out of this. In 12, we talk about body, mind, and spirit a lot, and health becomes extremely important. And so, when I think about health, a word that shows up a lot in conversation, structure becomes extremely important, right? And so, sleep hygiene is something we have to be able to talk about, right? Diet is something that we have to be able to talk about. There's a lot of things that go into, what are you doing in terms of physical activity? You got to treat the whole. It's not just about I take the chemical away and everything will be okay.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
When people come into your facility,
Yep.
I'm going on what I see. I don't know. When you put them in there, do you lock them in a room and just let them get over it?
It's not 1940, man.
Huh? I'm saying
No.
Yeah.
Fair question.
I don't know.
A lot of it's a lot of engagement, right? And so I get a lot of battle. There's a lot of back and forth with the individual because you're not feeling well, right? If you're there, you're not feeling well,
Mhm.
right? But I'm going to be getting.
But how do you get it out of their system? What do you do?
It's time. The chemicals they have to metabolize. They metabolize themselves through the system. Now, certain chemicals are going to metabolize quicker than others and come out of your system. Alcohol be out of your system 24, 36 hours. You can still test it up to about 80 hours in urine, but reality, alcohol be out of your system.
Heroin is 3 days.
About 3 days. Cannabis is going to be weeks.
45 days at least.
Benzos are going to be a little bit longer, but you really that takes time, and it's going to be a very uncomfortable period of time. Methamphetamine, cocaine, there will be a big crash from that. I've had the cocaine guy that literally has been in bed for 2 days straight. Now, you check on that guy every 15, 30 minutes, how he's doing. I'm not waking him up, but I am checking, right? Are you breathing? Is he getting up? When's the last time this guy ate? And then we're going to be we check vitals every couple hours with everybody that's in detox. So you always have an idea where somebody's at in terms of health.
Right.
And that's some of the biggest complaints. I'm sick and I just want to get some rest. And I'm like, I understand that, but we are going to monitor you through this process to make sure that you are safe, because I understand that you're uncomfortable, but your safety will take the priority over your comfort. And so, Millie does.
That lock them in the room. So that's just a myth.
Back in the 70s, there was a movie called Lady Sings the Blues.
Okay.
Diana Ross.
Mm-hmm.
She was a heroin addict, and during that time period, they would take the heroin addicts, and it was mental. They would put them in a mental institution, put them in a straitjacket, and that was the detox. They put them in a room, strap them up, and that was the detox. They didn't even give you chemicals. They made sure you were. By the time you left there, you were supposed to be quote unquote sober.
Yep.
They didn't even do any mental therapy. There was no one to come around and talk to you about it. Nope, you were considered a junkie. They strapped you up in a straitjacket and put you up in a room.
Yep.
Today, they actually use it's more mental. It's more, let's sit down, let's talk about, let's find out how you got this disease. why you have this disease, and then let's talk about why are you maintaining to keep using it. So from there, we can figure out how we can help you to wing off of it. That's what the other medication is for, is to help you get off of the bad drugs that you want to get
or
off.
at least step you down.
Well, you know, but I'm going to tell you something, Terry. People use the heroin, right? And then they use the methadone to come off of it. Methadone is worse than the heroin. I'm telling you, the methadone destroys your bones and all kind of stuff.
Methadone's nasty.
Yeah, but this is what they give heroin addicts to come down. And they get hooked on the methadone, just like they're hooked on the heroin. And they got to keep taking this methadone. Keep taking it.
Yeah, and the withdrawal from with methadone is pretty significant. It's a pretty painful process to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you really have to help wean somebody down to a very, very low dose methadone before you would really even want to put them in a because when you abruptly stop taking it, you get really, really sick. And I mean, you would crawl out of your, if somebody just locked you in, you know what I mean? The treatment on that is, methadone's different. Methadone's been around a long time.
Yeah, it's been around a long time, but again, it's still a very, very dangerous drug. It is, and to me, it's just as bad as heroin.
Yeah.
I've seen people on that methadone, man, and they still look like they high on heroin.
Well, it could be in really high doses too, and that's why, you know, methadone's been around since the late 30s. I mean, it's synthesized by German scientists, right? You know, World War II, in preparation for a morphine shortage, and you know, sometime in the 40s, I think it found its way. Dolafine is what it was called. End pain, right? It's a German word. And then somewhere in the 60s, they started using it to treat heroin addicts. And then it's kind of really evolved. And you know, there's different medications now that are used for you know, for the heroin or the opioid use disorder. You know, Suboxone's, you know, that's been around since about 2002.
I never heard of it.
Suboxone, yeah, buprenorphine. Buprenorphine's the opioid that's there that there's different, you know, there's Subutex, but
Speaking
Suboxone
another language to me, bro.
since 2002, and that's what you'll use to help kind of wean somebody down. Problem is, you got to wait a long time from the last time somebody uses methadone before you can use Suboxone, or the individual gets very, very sick.
So what are you doing between time?
They're very, very sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been sober for quite a while.
October was 10 years.
How's it feel?
Feels good.
Feels great.
Feels good considering it took me probably close to 25 years to be able to. I mean, I struggled with I went all around the board with chemicals. I had my problems with just about every single one of them, and you know, every single one of them took another piece of me along the way.
Right.
And in 2013, not only did I get sober again, but I've been able to stay sober up until this, you know, this moment here.
And what helps keep you sober?
Being involved.
Okay.
And so again, I think I said earlier, it's really, you know, I believe this, that recovery will show up and stay consistent for you if you can create a lifestyle for yourself that supports recovery. And so for myself personally, for a long time, right, I wanted to be able to tell you where my recovery started and stopped, where my job started and stopped, where my friends started and stopped, where my family stuff started and stopped. And the reality of it was, it needed to be woven together. There needed to be a lifestyle for me that supported the recovery, because it needed to be something that I lived rather than something that I was going to do from time to time. And that was a tough transition to make, because the lie always was, if I commit to that, I'm going to lose all this. The reality was, I was losing it all already.
Anyway.
Or it was lost. Right. And so, you know, truly being able to come to a place, and this is the part where I say it takes a lot of help and a lot of support, to be able to see the consequences, the true consequences, negative consequences of my behavior, and have other people help me see that.
Like your family.
Friends, other people that had done this longer than me or before me, right? And that's a lot of the value of 12-step recovery that I found, right? I've never looked at 12-step, I've never looked at an AA meeting as treatment, right? But I do look at a way that that can help treat. It's support, right? It's a way to support me through that process, and that becomes a lifestyle. And I always looked at that like, I don't want to be this guy, like these holy rollers or whatever I would come up with, right? That's my own arrogance. That's my own shame. That's my own
while you're
judgment.
sitting around in the meeting, I think I've been to a couple of them, the support meetings
Mm-hmm.
where the family comes in and then you realize how bad these guys were. They stole your television set.
Right.
They did all kind of things, and now they're asking for your support.
My biggest problem was accepting the fact that I belong there. Right? You listen to all this, and I want to judge this and judge that, and this guy says the same thing every week, and look the way this guy looks, and look the way this guy sounds. And if I focused on all the different stuff, I mean, anybody could sit in there and make that argument, right?
So,
but
so you cured yourself?
Cured myself?
Yeah.
No, I've put that with the support of this is what I believe for myself, that other people helped support me in early recovery long enough till I got to a place where I actually believed that I could do it myself. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I never thought I was worth saving. And so there was a lot of shame with that, right? I was the sum of my past, right? And so if you were a guy like me and you've done the things and you've lived the life that I've lived and hurt the people the way I've hurt people, then I don't deserve anything good to ever happen to me.
So you undervalued yourself.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to tell you that, right? I was going to be, oh, I'm so grateful to be here, and you've helped me out so much. But I didn't really believe that. I believed that I was a piece of, right, and I would hang on to that, because at the end of the day, I could always go to that. That's a wonderful place to reach to if I want to give myself permission to self-destruct.
Right.
And so there was, enough people that I was kind of be able to. So if I'm sitting around hating myself, and then I'm in a room, and you're talking about how you used to work, how you used to hate yourself, and how you worked through it, right? Or you talk to you because you used to hate yourself, and you had that conversation. There's a vulnerability in that's attractive for a guy like me. Now I got to be able to give myself permission to be vulnerable with you, right? But that's what that support kind of offers. Because, well, what do you mean you used to hate yourself?
So you mean everybody's in the room talking together?
One person will talk at a time, but there'll be, 20, 30 sometimes.
Yeah, it's a circle. They put chairs in a circle around a circle. Mm-hmm. And usually you sit with your family member or who's ever coming to support you, and you kind of have a group discussion. And everybody's got a turn. They get a turn to say what they want to say, including the family members. If they're kind of pissed at you because of things that you did, then they will express themselves during the meeting.
And then there's, a lot of like an AA meeting will just be alcoholics, right? And so we're from all different walks of life, but like-minded in the sense that we're at least there because we don't want to pick up a drink today. And you'll have anybody from drunk in that moment, one day sober, to haven't had a drink in 30 years, right? And so you'll have a lot, and that's where when I would hear somebody like in a meeting that I knew was like 8, 10, 12 years sober, right? And I would listen to them talk about how they got so angry at work today that they felt like they wanted to
have a drink
or smack their boss, or they got so angry, but they didn't do that, or they didn't shoot their mouth off, or whatever it was. Like, there's a piece of that for a guy like at certain times that was fascinating to me, like self-control, but then there was also this other part was like, it took a lot of courage for this man to sit in this room and say something like that, because everything else I've heard this guy say over the last couple of weeks, he sounded like he had it all together, right? He had a suit on, he was seems very successful. But here's this man that hasn't had a drink in 10, 12 years talking about what it's like to be a human being, right? And being able to connect with that. And so that's sometimes the maybe the service piece of recovery that doesn't get talked to. Maybe it does, but when I've had other men in my life share things with me that were like sensitive or personal, like they're struggling with this relationship or they're struggling with that, like they allow me to see them as a human being. They've now indirectly given me permission to be able to reciprocate that, or they've given me permission to be able to be a human being in their presence too. Now, I get to make the decision in that moment what I do with that.
How much you want to open up.
Right. But there's been so many people that have done that for me over the years. And my goal is to be able to reciprocate that. You know, I've sat with other men and cried, right? That was something you could never do. But somebody showed me that. And so I've allowed myself to be able to show that to somebody else too. And so, you know, when I think about community, when I think about connection, when I think about service, a lot of those 12-step principles that we talk about a lot, I mean, that's a huge piece for me. You know, and it was a lot of other men, and they showed me that it was okay to hurt. They showed me it was okay to be sad. They showed me it was okay to be terrified, right? And so they told me they showed me it's okay to be angry. You know, being angry is not your problem, Matt. What you do with your anger becomes your issue.
Right.
So how do we look at a different way to maybe process that or handle that? And so, you know, if you change the way you can look at the way that you think, connect it to how you feel, and you can make some adjustments, you can change what you do. And that's, you know, it's the value of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Thoughts and feelings dictate behavior.
Well, before we close out the show, because we get to the end of the show,
Yeah, we did it.
just want to ask you, somebody wants to get involved in doing what you're doing. What steps or what measure would they take in order to be you without the addiction?
Sure. So what part of, you know, what's the piece that you're really drawn to, right? And so, you know, in terms of, you know, drug and alcohol treatment, you know, you have there's counselors, right? And so there's different certifications you can take through the Pennsylvania Certification Board. You know, like a certified recovery specialist, right? And that, you know, you can go work at all kinds of places and do what a lot of times it's called like recovery coaching and helping people and getting them to meetings. And some of that looks like some case management stuff and helping them find jobs and getting to, there's almost like there's a social work piece to that. And then there's, you know, drug and alcohol counseling, which you need to go to school, right, for. And so, you know, you get your CADC, you know, you be a certified drug and alcohol counselor. But you're going to need to go to school for a couple of years to do that.
My son.
Okay.
That's what he does.
That's what he does. And then there's, you know, there's case management stuff that individuals do. But what I've seen a lot of people do is come in at the ground floor. And I'm a version of this, right? I started working third shift a couple of days a week at a recovery house.
Right.
And I was like, man, I really enjoy this. And so then you do this, then you do that, and I found I wanted to go more the operational educational route.
Right.
And not the counseling route. But a lot of people have gone the counseling route and then they decline.
Well, thank you very, very, very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I'm glad that you came on for the second time. I appreciate it. And I may ask you to come on again because this is mental health, substance abuse. These all seem to be real hot topics.
Sure.
In the schools and what's going on, it seems to be a little crazy.
Well, close to 70% of all American families are directly impacted by addiction. I mean, that's a big number.
All right. Got to say thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
My clock went off.
The clock went off. All right.
All right. This is Kendall Stevenson, GenesisRadio.com. Again, if you'd like to give us a call at any time, that's 888-304-4401. Thank you again, and peace.
Thank you.